When Karl Marx wrote Das Kapital, he wasn't claiming that the system of capitalism fundamentally didn't work. It clearly seems to be working currently, but rather the who it was working for was a massively more important of a question. And if you think that who is you, well, buckle up. Today, we're discussing exploitation. Essentially, the entire first chapter of Capital Volume 1 dedicates itself to thoroughly explaining how value is created. I will provide links to Marx's work, but to cut out a lot of the technical details, it comes down to people create value through the labor they produce. Now, this isn't just frivolous labor. You can't beat a nail into a log for an hour, then demand payment for an hour of labor. Nor does something gain value if your creation isn't something useful to someone else. But what Marx was ultimately trying to put a big fat pin into was if you labored for an hour, you deserved to be compensated for that hour of work. Not exactly rocket science. Extrapolating that further, Marx illustrated that under capitalism, the goal was for the capitalist to convince you, well, maybe you didn't deserve all of your compensation. We can begin to express this as such. Let's say blocks of unprocessed wood cost $10 total. To keep things simple, we're not going to discuss how the wood was sourced in this example. The business buys the wood, and the worker spends time crafting the wood blocks into a chair. Now, these blocks of wood have gained value and can now be resold as a chair for $25 by the business that employs the worker. Maybe you find yourself in a similar position at your own job. Perhaps you convert coffee beans and milk into lattes, or perhaps you work in marketing, retail, or fast food. Continuing our example, the worker, we'll call him Joe, is paid $2 per chair. Now, I understand that most people work hourly or on salary, but for the sake of making this a simplified example, we're basing his pay off the work he produces. After the company sells the chair for $25, the company takes the leftover revenue from the chair to be distributed wherever the company sees fit. In this case, $13 is left over. Perhaps the profit will go back into the company, helping to refine the cost of production to make a better profit for the business. Maybe the business can install an automated woodcutter that means they can fire an employee that's no longer needed, or a marketing campaign that will boost awareness for their commodity. Or likewise, perhaps the revenue goes into an end-of-year bonus for the management team. I mean, they did hard work, right? Now, as we all know, as a company becomes more profitable, the more its workers make, which is why Amazon worker... I'm sorry, yeah, we all know that's not true. Unfortunately for workers like Joe, who created the majority of wealth for the business, he will never be compensated completely for his labor. Instead, the company acts like a filter, scraping off a certain amount of profit off of each employee, and then in turn, reinvesting that money somewhere else. As a result, the direction of the business, or just generally where the money goes, are out of Joe's hands. Ironically for America, a country that touts itself for democracy and freedoms, we see very little of it in the workplace. As we zoom out from this small example over a vast population of workers in a nation, we see this as the net national product. This exploitation divides the nation largely into two groups, the exploited and the exploiter. The exploiters hold power through wealth, through the unpaid revenue they collect from their value-creating workforce. Perhaps in a perfect world, we like to imagine capitalism takes that revenue and redistributes it as necessary for a harmonious system of growth, where a rising tide lifts all boats. After all, as we mentioned at the start of this video, Karl Marx didn't state that capitalism fundamentally didn't work, but rather the who it worked for was far more of an important question. Under complete transparency, if you and the CEO of your company work the same number of hours, you're likely to have worked harder and still be paid less. For example, if you work for a business like Walmart, you'd be making about 1,188 times less than your CEO. Ask yourself, does your boss work 1,188 times harder than you? Doug McMillan earned $22.8 million during the retailer's last fiscal year, which ended on January 31st, according to the company's filings. Walmart's median employee, meanwhile, earned $19,177 in the same period. I think sometimes this notion gets lost, but typically your boss does serve a purpose. CEOs, COOs, middle management, etc. Especially in small or medium-sized businesses, they do serve roles. But their jobs are often inflated to social extremes of immense importance and value, when in reality the work they produce is, at best, no more important than the laborer at the bottom of the hierarchy. Their role may be different, but no entrepreneur with employees can do the job themselves. Otherwise, they wouldn't need to exploit the employees in the first place. Capitalist entrepreneurs essentially sing a siren song to the workers to advance their own personal goals. They dangle the opportunity of wealth to the individual, only asking the worker to sacrifice the full reimbursement of their labor in exchange for that opportunity. But what the workers don't realize is that collectively, even under socialism in which capitalism still exists, they'd have more control and job security than under the thumb of the capitalist, which only serves to achieve their own goals. Essentially, only valuing workers so far as they're useful to those goals. As a former boss in my own life once said to me, "Without entrepreneurs, nobody would know how to guide the ship," which is literally self-inflated nonsense. The proof is even self-evident. US worker co-op statistics show employee-run businesses generally have a greater resilience to failure versus those traditionally run from the top down. The argument presented by the capitalist is only meant to reinforce their own self-importance and idealized position at the top of the hierarchy. As you may be gathering, Karl Marx saw the workers as the most important element of the economy and society. Regardless of where you may position yourself on the political landscape, it's hard to dismiss the idea that workers aren't the foundation that built the world around us and deserve the credit and compensation. In Marxism, the workers, or exploited, are known as the proletarian and will serve as the basis of our discussion as we move forward in the series.